Hello, Markus. Thank you very much for the introduction. This topic is really like close to my heart. Like experimentation, product validation is like really something I became very passionate about. So, and I don't do many to actually know webinars anymore at this time in my career because we're building our own venture right now, and I need all focus on that. But like I made an exception for Akash and the guys because I really love what they're doing. So you should definitely check it out. So I've spent my last almost 10 years building products in different, like from being a consultant, a coach, an individual contributor, a leader for larger product teams. I have had the chance to grow product teams from basically one person to 100 two times in N26 and in a key scooter sharing startup. And after now about being a coach and consultant for the last 2.5 years, mid last year, I finally got started with my own venture again. And I'm now co-founder and co-CEO at a med tech compliance startup. So very, very niche B2B. First time I'm actually doing B2B myself, but it's really exciting. We raised a pre-seed round of almost 2 million last year. And we've done this without a single line of code. So no code written yet. We have a 6-people team. Our first hire was a UX UI designer because product design and validation and experimentation is so important to us. And I can share a little bit also about our journey of getting started this new company. But I will also talk about examples from way in the past. And today in that introduction, I want to give you a bit of an overview because the topic of experimentation is so broad. There's so much to learn about this. I could run a 6 weeks course where we do 2-3 sessions every week to get you up to full speed. But I want to give you an overview of what are the mental stages I go through, what are different frameworks that help me here and there, and point you to maybe 1 or 2 other things where you can go and start reading deeper. Feel free to ask questions in the chat anytime. I pick up on some questions right away. And I will keep some questions for the end. I can also overrun about 10-15 minutes. So if there's a long Q&A, if you have a lot of questions, I'm very happy to stay a bit longer. I planned in some time for a Q&A at the end, but yeah, it depends a little bit on how many questions you have. So feel free to bring questions. Leave them for the end if they don't fit perfectly in. But also feel free if there's something that's not clear that I'm saying, then drop the question right away. And we're going to decide on how. So that's a short intro. I'll have some slides for you that give a bit of guidance for you to visually follow, and for me to also have some have some structure along. So let me share that with you, and you should see it right now. I hope I can make all that work. Okay. So in presentation mode, I hope to see the chat activity right away. We're gonna test this, so please share in the chat just as a little warm up. What's the biggest personal experiment you've ever done? Something you of course want to share. There might be some things you don't want to share. So just warming up a little bit. What has been a personal experiment you've done? And you say, hey, that was a really big one, a big life-changing one. I hope that chat works, and I want to see how you folks are engaging here. So yeah, I want to see a couple of interesting personal experiments. Can you, Akos, can test the chat? I don't see anything, to be honest.
Me neither. I'm gonna, starting a company, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay. I need to switch to comments. I've seen a private one, private chat. So a good test. Starting a company. It's a lifelong experiment. Living abroad, also a good one. From you, I was also a very interesting experiment to go to Singapore for a couple of months. A few fake door tests about products and business models. I love fake door tests. It's such a powerful method. We're gonna briefly talk about this one as well. Building functionality for delivering precision medication. Oh, I would love to learn more about that. Fake buttons. A fake button to test interest in a new feature. So it's also kind of a fake door test. So I think experimentation is not only something for product building, but I personally am also very passionate about experimenting with myself. Like here, 100 push-ups a day for 100 days. I love such experiments. And I think for me, that's experimentation is a whole mindset around like trying new things, validating and testing along the way. And for me, in product, the core concept is around like testing business ideas basically. And because I see so many people go and build, and building is the most expensive way to test. So if that's like, probably you joined the session because you're aware of that. But usually when I say this to business people, they start to think about it and they start to listen more. So you need some provocative comments sometimes to kind of wake up some folks. So experimentation is something that I think should be also in the tool set of not just product people, product designers, product managers, but also with like business developers nowadays and founders. And it's like you can leverage the best out of it if you have a cross-disciplinary team working on the experiment. So like for me, that is my core mindset is like, hey, whenever I build, I need to be really sure what I'm building, because it's most of the time it will take way longer. It will probably not work. So it's a usually very expensive way to test if you build right away. And I can give you one example to kick this off, like where we have used this. Because I think you can use experimentation on a feature level, on a product level, on a new company level, on different levels. And at my time at Circ, which was a kick scooter sharing company that we sold to Bird at the end, we were like at some point one guy from our business development approached me and said, "Hey, Markus, like we have a couple of hundred scooters, or I don't remember, even 1,000 scooters that are not like fitting into our fleet because they're an exotic, like a special model that we've ordered a long time ago. What should we do? We should sell them to our clients. And hey, we talked with our CEO, we should sell them to our clients. And can you please make that possible in the application?" And I said, like, Hannes, it's a good idea. But it's like not that easy to kind of switch a whole application from a renting concept, like where you kind of go and rent a scooter for a couple of minutes, to I own a scooter, I order a scooter, it's my private scooter, I can share it with friends and so on. Even if we would hack it in, like, it would be quite some work, and it would like mess up a little bit our application. He said, how hard can it be, and so on. So we had a bit of an argument. I said, okay, how can I get rid of this thing? Or how can we actually validate it? Like at that point, I didn't really believe in it. So I said, like, okay, well, how could we test it? And if you convince me that this is a good thing, then maybe we should consider it. And so we agreed that he will do a landing page test. I told him, hey, Hannes, like, if you can sell this to our customers, then I'm very happy to build this and prioritize this kind of big feature or product for you. And I told him, like, please, like, announce this product, build a landing page, and get people signed up that they want, like, that they kind of pre-sign up to this product. And I asked him, like, what do you think, how many people you can get within 2 weeks or 1 week? He said, yeah, like, I can get 1,000 people. We have such a strong reach on social media and so on. I said, that's awesome. If you can bring me 1,000 people who sign up for buying their own scooter and up running it with us, like, I will do this. Like, I will drop a lot of other things and I'll prioritize it. He was excited. He ran to the marketing team. They built a very quick landing page. They made an announcement. That's the only thing I was able to find from that time. Like, he made a LinkedIn announcement and a big marketing boost around it. So, they started this landing page test, and it was Friday when they started it, or Thursday or so. And on Monday, I asked him, "Hey, Hannes, like, how's the landing page test going? Like, how many scooters did you actually sell?" And he was completely disappointed. And he said, like, I don't know, less than 10, definitely. I don't remember the exact number, but it was like less than 10 people who actually signed up for this product. And I said, that's great. Like, you can be proud of yourself. You saved this company a lot of time and energy and money. And he was like totally disappointed. He said, I need more time. I said, okay, like 2 weeks instead of 1 week, and bring me 500 users. And I will do this. But I think it's like this early signal is that this is just not something that's interesting for our users. And he did, like, he pushed really hard, and I think he got it to somewhere 50 users or like less than 100 in 2 weeks. And then he gave up on it, and even the CEO said, actually, it was a stupid idea, and so on. So the whole company was, or the whole leadership team around this topic was really convinced. And again, I've emphasized here, hey, it's not a failure, it's not a mistake, it's not a disappointment. They actually have created a lot of value for our company, because it would have taken us so much time, and the disappointment would have been crazy after us investing, the whole tech team investing probably a month or 2 months into this project. And with this, we only have, I had 1 or 2 business people spending a bit of time on this. So that experiment actually should show you that that the mindset is very important for experimentation. So about this kind of mindset of it's okay, kind of, even if an experiment fails, and most experiments fail, you learn a lot, and this can be a very strong instrument to lead and guide stakeholders and people around the business side. You just need to know how to use it, and that's why you need to learn what tools exist, what processes are there, and so on. And I want to guide you a little bit through these processes today. Before we go into that, I actually want to show you a very interesting graph that I copy-pasted from the book Experimentation Works: The Surprising Power of Business Experimentations. You can like challenge that a little bit, but it's very interesting because they kind of put the S&P 500 and then the experimenters index, like companies that are well known for heavy experimentation, such as Booking.com, Facebook, Google. Like, these companies are driven by experimentation on large scale, and it's crazy what kind of business difference that makes. Of course, there's also other factors to that. Those are all digital companies, S&P 500, a lot of non-digital companies as well. But I thought it's a very interesting argument when you talk with business people to show them, hey, like, that makes a big difference. Why do I talk about this business people aspect? It's because oftentimes we in product don't get the resources, time, budget, whatever it is, to start experimentation, because it has a little bit an upfront investment initially to set up the infrastructures, to get the knowledge and so on, to get into this experimentation mode. And you're going to experience a lot of experiments that fail. And that's why you need to have buy-in from business leaders that experimentation makes sense, particularly from the top management. And then you want to invest into that. And I want to give you a couple of arguments how to do that, because that's usually a first step before you even think about like the experimentation flow itself. So when we talk about the experimentation flow, I try to simplify it here a bit, saying, okay, you have assumptions, you prioritize them, run experiment, and learn. That's a very simple flow. We're going to go step by step through it, and I tell you a little bit about my favorite frameworks and approaches and that. I won't go deep in it because a lot of the frameworks you can read into it. But I want to start with something, and that's like maybe something you ask yourself, like, why should you work with assumptions? And I think it's very important to always like say, okay, most things we do are just assumptions, and some assumptions have higher confidence or low confidence. And like in this little illustration here, you say, okay, oftentimes we test the stuff on the top, but there's something really critical that could make the whole thing like fall down or disrupt the whole product, and that's something we miss. So that's something we're going to talk about in when we talk about prioritization. But in assumptions, we try to make our beliefs and biases more explicit. And oftentimes designers particularly ask me the question like, should we even talk about assumptions? Is that not a bias in itself? And I think it's better we make our bias explicit and say, hey, that's what we believe, and then go and test it and falsify it, versus saying, okay, we only want to learn, we don't have, and they pretend there is no bias. I think that's not true. Second, it gives your research and experimentation efforts a focus. Oftentimes I see teams, they do like a lot of research and a lot of user-centric work, but they spend way too much. Like, they're super slow because they research every little thing. And they're on the opposite spectrum. You have a lot of teams that don't do anything. And both extremes are not good. You need to figure out like, what are my most risky pieces? Get 80% of the information, get 80% of the critical things out of the way, and then move on. Like, you need to move quickly. You don't have time to like research every little detail. And working with assumptions helps you to prioritize where to put your research and experimentation energy on. Like, currently, we are developing conceptualizing a new product, and we have figured out, like, in our whole flow, there are two elements that are really critical, and we spend a lot of time on those two, and the rest is like, yeah, we're gonna test it on the side. There's a lot of industry standards out there on like how to do this stuff, so we don't over-engineer the login screen, the reset password, the profile section of our product. We focus on where the critical elements are, where we have a high UX risk or high risk of failure, so to say. If you do it right, you speed up the process because, of course, like you focus, and so assumptions help you to get faster actually at the end of the day, but you have to learn how to use it. And many people who are not used to work with assumptions struggle with even coming up with assumptions and trying to make their beliefs tangible. So here are a couple of ideas how you can come up with assumptions if you or your team struggle with coming up with assumptions. So one way to do it is like using the link canvas, but that's particularly interesting if you build a new product, and go through every section. Like first write down, like fill out the link canvas template with the stuff of your, like that concludes your product in a couple of bullet points or so, and then come up with assumptions for every section of the link canvas and say, okay, what are our assumptions around the problem that our product is supposed to solve? What are assumptions on the solution? What are assumptions on like what metrics are important? What are assumptions on the revenues we make, on the costs of this specific product, on the customers around? So think about like boxes or categories of assumptions. And if you still struggle, you can try, for example, to phrase it in negative terms and say, the value proposition will fail unless our customers, for example, appreciate speed more than than price, or unless our customers appreciate user experience more than I don't know, the completeness of features, whatever. So make it a fail unless our product will fail unless our customers show this behavior. Our product will fail unless the costs are like we can provide this service below €5 per month or something. So fail unless, like, interestingly, oftentimes when we convert it, we kind of are better in coming up with assumptions. You can also go with a very traditional way and just say, we assume that following blah, blah, blah. Or you can say, okay, based on this and this input of this expert or that research or that paper, we have that assumption. So you can like read through your like background research and say, okay, at the end of the day, we did some background research, but all assumptions again, with maybe a little bit more confidence. So that's one way to do it. Another way is a pre-mortem. So that's similar to the fail unless, but in more extreme version, where you say, you assume you have 1 year from now and you have failed. Like put yourself in a moment, in a mental moment, and say, okay, we messed it up. What could have been the reasons? What went wrong? So pretend you failed. So that helps you to uncover very interesting assumptions. If you struggle finding assumptions, it's a very interesting, fun workshop to do with your team or with someone in your team. Another very simple approach, if all of that's complicated for you, just think about the 3 core aspects of that a product needs to fulfill. A product needs to be desirable, feasible, technically feasible, but also like simple for a user to understand, and viable in a business sense. And you can just like name reasons for what are assumptions around the desirability, the feasibility, viability. That's also a simple way. I just think if you help your team to categorize assumptions, it's easier for them to come up with assumptions than just like, okay, come up with assumptions. Like, where do I start? Where do I even like kick it off? So that can be helpful. And one more is the opportunity solution tree. If you're not familiar with it, go and Google it. It's one of my absolute favorite frameworks when it comes to product management overall. And it also helps to identify assumptions, because you write down the desired outcome and say, hey, we want to achieve X, like improve conversion of something, increase subscription revenue, or even the outcome might be building a completely new product that fulfills a user need. And then you break that product down into opportunities and solutions, and then map, like basically every solution that you have is an assumption, and you can map experiments against those solutions. So this whole tree that you built is an assumption that you can challenge. So if you struggle with the other 3 methods, you can make it a level more concrete with the opportunity solution tree, and then cross-check your assumptions against that So all of those four things can be ways to generate assumptions more easily. Quick one. Think about it. What's the difference between assumption and hypothesis? Does anyone have an idea? Like, feel free to post in the chat. Because you hear there's also a lot like hypothesis-driven product management. And then this guy's talking about assumptions. Like, what's the difference even? Any ideas? I think it's a technical detail, but I think it matters. At least we in product should have heard it. Yeah, Arena. I would say like it's not that different in a sense like that it's both can be focused on the solution and on problem. You can have problem assumptions, solution assumptions, problem hypotheses, and solution hypotheses. Yeah, like I see some good good examples. Felix Thomas and sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. It is really about the testability. Like assumptions, like around assumptions, we accept the risk that the assumption is false and move on. Like say it's an assumption, let's do it. As soon as we transfer it into an hypothesis, we attempt to test and falsify it. So we try to put an assumption into a format that we can actually validate it and test it. Regardless of that, like I always recommend start with assumptions. Like list your assumptions of what you assume and then prioritize those assumptions and then transfer the assumption over to a hypothesis and say, okay, like I have 100 assumptions or 50 assumptions, and then make the top 5 most risky ones, and we're going to talk about this in a moment. Try to convert them over to hypothesis so you can really test it. That is the difference. So it's a mental step. And to give you an example, like a well-done hypothesis is testable, precise, and discrete. What does it mean? Like here's an assumption. For example, a product we could build is like, we believe millennials will spend a lot on science projects. So the problem here is not really precise. It would be, if you form an assumption, you would make it way more precise and testable by saying, we believe millennial parents with kids aged 5 to 9 will pay €5 a month for curated science projects that matches the kids' education level. That is a hypothesis. That is an assumption, so to say. But you don't want to start with hypotheses because it's too complex. You want to be quick in generating assumptions and then transfer that over to hypotheses once you have prioritized assumptions. One more example that builds on that, and that's an example that is not discrete because it combines 2 assumptions into one. It says, we believe we can buy and ship science project boxes at a profit. And here the problem is buy and ship. It combines 2 assumptions into one. And in the assumption, it's still okay, but if you want to transfer that over into an hypothesis, you would split those two into 2 assumptions. One is around like shipping, and one is around buying the materials and stuff that you need. So it's just like you don't need to over-engineer it. We are not in hardcore research here, but I would say still you have to pay a little bit of attention how you design basically the test. We can come to this in a moment when we talk about step 3 in the experimentation process. But I wanted to make sure you understand the differences between. I would not say assumptions are purely unprioritized hypotheses. Assumptions and hypotheses both can be unprioritized. Hypotheses are more precise, as you see here. They try to be really testable and written in a way that you can test them, and they're very discrete in a sense that you don't mix things together. Assumptions are just like the more informal way to do it, which is a good way to get started. Particularly when we now get to point 2, in prioritization. It's very important you prioritize your assumptions because you cannot test everything, and you should come up with a lot of assumptions. And I personally love. I'm really excited, and that's a technique we used multiple times in building our new company. Is like again and again, like putting a matrix on the whiteboard and trying to prioritize assumptions on 2 levels. On first the impact, and second the confidence. Like how confident are we? How much evidence do we have that this assumption is true? And the impact is like, if this assumption is not true, how much will this mess up our business? How much is the product in danger of not being working? Like on the top end side, it means like, if the assumption is not true, it is like basically our business is dead. This product can be thrown away. You can start from scratch. If the assumption is down here, it means like, okay, we need to make a small change and move on. Like wording is not clear to customers, so I don't know. And over here, it means high certainty, high evidence. I have a lot of proof, and a lot of proof means I have done experiments, I have maybe a lot of experience on this, and validated this thoroughly. Whereas low certainty is just gut feeling, maybe not even gut feeling, it's just blind guess. And what you do is you map your assumptions on that matrix, and you focus on the top 3 to 5, because that's all you can, like, focus on top 3, 5, design experiments for your top 3 to 5 assumptions, run those experiments, and then come back to the board again and see what you've learned and reassess stuff. For example, like one of my early assumptions that we had in our product is like, okay, we have identified a meta problem in the medical quality management compliance space, and we were very convinced that we like the big product, customers would pay for it, but we were not sure we can find an MVP, standalone MVP thing that is small enough that we can build in a couple of months and users will pay for it, so we can generate traction. So that was one of our most critical hypotheses at some point. So we went really deep and tried to figure out what could be different ways to enter this market with an MVP. And when we validated that with customers, we built a prototype and learned, okay, we actually found an MVP approach over time. And then a new thing became the most critical assumption, so to say. So you work yourself always through the top 3 to 5 assumptions. And if you ask me like how many assumptions should you generate with your team, I would give you like guidance, double as many as it's easy to come up with. So if it's easy to come up for your team or for yourself with 10 assumptions, like easy, I mean like you just keep on writing and you're in a complete flow of thinking and assumption after assumption after assumption. And at some point you stop and you start thinking, what else could be an assumption? And from that point on, double the list. Then you have a good, then you kind of went deep enough and not stayed only on the surface. But it's like at some point you also need to stop it. So this is my kind of gut feeling guidance. It's like how many assumptions should be on the board. That can be 10, that can be 50, it can be 100. That depends, of course, on the field and how broad the problem is. If the problem is very narrow that you kind of build assumptions around, then of course you won't find as many as like if you do assumption mapping for a whole business idea, which is extremely broad. So prioritize. And one more layer, if you want to advance this even further, you can color code your post-its or whatever things and define how complex is it to test this assumption, to learn more, to de-risk it. And you start with if two are equally on an equal level on impact versus confidence, so they are almost next to each other, then you always go for the one. Think for a moment, lower effort or higher effort. Which one will you go for? Lower one. You're gonna go for lower effort first, because they're both equally risky. So you first de-risk the one that's simpler to de-risk, because maybe that will already kill your whole business idea. So if you kind of go for the one that is like more risky, so chance you just wasted more time by still figuring out the same result. So if it's equal, go for the faster one, but otherwise the simplicity of de-risking is not the main driver in this type of prioritization matrix. One more tip when working with assumptions and prioritizing them is to break assumptions down in smaller pieces. What do I mean with it? Like you have a big assumption, and usually one big assumption it consists of small pieces. And here the opportunity solution tree can again help you, because it's also a breakdown of opportunity and sub-opportunity and sub-opportunity and solutions. So it's a breakdown. You make things smaller, and this way tests will become preciser and it will become easier to test stuff. Sorry, I need a little bit of water. So keep going. So I have an example here. So let's say we want to build a product that helps remote first startups to manage offsites. So offsite as a service for remote first startups. That was a business idea we validated at some point in the last year. And if your assumption is they are willing to pay for an offsite, that is a quite big assumption. You can use that and validate it. But we could also break that down and say, okay, how can we make this easier to test? Because the cool thing is usually like you should design a way if you validate one of those three sub-assumptions, the big one is also disproven. So you just speed up the process. So in our scenario here, we can say, okay, willing to pay, this means like they're doing at least 2 offsites per year. Otherwise, they probably are not willing to pay for a continuous offsite as a service product. They organize offsites. The organization of an offsite comes with a significant effort. Otherwise, they would not pay for an offsite as a service. And they would trust our company to organize an offsite equally good as they would do it themselves, because it's probably something that's very important to them. So we could test those 3 things, and if one of those 3 is true, is untrue, it's a high chance that this is untrue as well. So this is an example of like, if you have big startups, you need to break it down into big assumptions. You need to break them down into smaller ones, because that will help you to be faster and better in validating experimenting. Step number 3, we talk about like how to come up with assumptions, how to prioritize assumption. Now we're in an interesting phase, and only now we start about experimenting. And this is where I could talk for like hours now. So I again will give you just a couple of hints where to read and learn. And of course, yes, that session is recorded and we're going to share it afterwards, so you can go through it in maybe like a little slower, because I'm talking quite fast, so to get a lot of input over to you. So that's a list of experiments sorted by the link canvas concept. So that's one way to tackle to choose the right experiment. So you say, okay, if you have an assumption in a problem space, these are experiments you should look into. If you have an assumption in the unique value proposition space and you want to validate that one, this is what you want to look into. Of course, some things you're going to see multiple times, such as customer interview. Customer interview is just one way for experimentation, one research method to experiment, a qualitative one. You have quantitative one, you have qualitative ones. And customer interview is like in this toolbox, it's like one of the most essential tools next to building clickable prototypes. But there are many others. And so what I want to show you, like if most of this stuff is new to you, you just like need to read into it, and I will encourage you to try out at least every experimentation method once, so you get a little bit of experience of like what it is, how it works, and so on. This, at the end of the day, you need to see this whole list here, and there are probably more, like there are more than just what I've listed here. This is just a list of stuff that I have dealt with in the past. Either helping startups do it or done it myself. And you can imagine this like a toolbox, and you're a plumber. And let's say if your water pipe breaks in your kitchen, you call the plumber and say, hey, please come over and fix that. And a plumber brings a full toolbox of tools, and a couple of tools the plumber will use every time this plumber is like checking problems, like a light, and say, okay, what's the problem? Let me see. But there are some tools the plumber will very rarely use for very exceptional problems or things. But the plumber has to be like able to know when to use which kind of tools and how to use this tool. And some tools, like the ones that the plumber uses every day, they need to be really good in using this tool. And then there might be some special cases where the plumber might ask a colleague and say, hey, like, I have a special case here. Can you remind me like how to best fix that? I know that this tool might be helpful. So see experimentation like a tool set. And what you need to do is you need to build your toolbox of tools. And this can be a starting point, and I'll share a book with you afterwards where I believe they do a really good job in giving an overview on all of these different experimentation methods. And so if you have an assumption and you have prioritized that assumption and now make it a hypothesis, check which segment is this assumption coming from. And in the lean canvas concept, like I think lean canvas is one of my absolute favorite frameworks, mental mindsets in like building a new product, a new company, because it's like it asks the key questions that you need to answer. And usually in the lean canvas, we start with customer segment and or problem, like those you come from the left and or right, maybe sometimes at the same time, can start either way. And then you work on a unique value proposition, then on the solution, and then on the rest of the things. So it gives you also guidance to say, okay, start first testing your customer assumptions and your problem assumption. Those are usually most critical ones in the early days of a new product or company. And then later, like the solution and business assumptions will become more critical once you have like shed some light towards customer problem. To like get a step further is like you need to, on the one hand side, learn about these single individual experimentation methods, and happy in the questions in the Q&A. If something is completely unknown to you, feel free to ask me. I have for most of this stuff I have examples. But what you actually need to learn next is how you pair experiments to make it a big like experimentation flow. And I want to spend a little bit of time on that thing, because this is something where like it's not so frequently used in books. So when you build a new product, like that's particularly true for new products. Sometimes you test a hypothesis. It's very precise on an existing product. Like, I don't know, customers are giving you feedback and says, you figure out that the customer doesn't understand a specific interaction in your product. Then you have a single request to deal with where you have maybe 5 assumptions around it. You run one experiment against it, figure out what the problem is, and solve it. So that's a case where you don't need this experimentation pairing necessarily. But when you build a new product from scratch, or build a new business even, which is also a new product in its core, then you need to pair those. And usually start in the beginning of a journey with a lot of uncertainty. And through experimentation, the uncertainty will go down and the fidelity of your experiments will go up. So the depth of the experiments will go up. And what I mean with this is like maybe the first phase of experimentation is observation and customer interviews. So when we started our new business, we interviewed about 20 customers in the medical space, really broad, from like startups to corporates to mid-sized organizations. We just knew that we've heard from news, okay, compliance and regulatory stuff is changing in that industry. There are big like changes happening. We should look into it. So we interviewed people in regulatory, quality affairs, experts and auditors in that space, really broad at first. And then learned and clustered and organized this thing a little bit. And after about 20 interviews, we basically, you can do, for example, some boomerang tests. That means that you take a competitor product and put it in front of potential customers, or test it yourself. It's not as good as if you put the competition product in front of a customer and then learn first from your competition products. It's the cheaper test you can do. It's like you learn what's good and what's bad. So oftentimes we just tend to blindly copy stuff from competition, and the competitors also didn't do a good job to really think this stuff through. It just seems that they have done a good job. We're at N26, we were always laughing when Deutsche Bank was copy stuff that we learned that doesn't actually work, and we were already working on version 2 of something. That was also always a funny thing. So you just notice it didn't really do a good job in like the competition research. And you start with customer interviews to explore. And that's only one funnel. That's not the blueprint. It's just one example how to pair experiments. And oftentimes that starts with interviews, because that's a very good qualitative way to do it. And then you can do, for example, as a next step in P2, that's more of a P2C setup. You run ads and a landing page test against it. But also in P2B, you can use that. For example, when we validated our business idea around offsite as a service, we built a very simple landing page, and we ran LinkedIn ads. We built a LinkedIn page and LinkedIn ads, and ran that against like CEOs and top managers of small remote companies, and want to understand, okay, who is pre-signing up for that? And there were 3 people signed up, and with one of them, we made an appointment and had a call. The other 2 didn't come back to us, even though they signed up. And we've learned a little bit about our acquisition costs. We learned like who do we need to target that. And at the end, we dropped the idea because we noticed, okay, we don't think the market is big enough. Even though we think that's an interesting product that could exist out there, but other ideas made us more excited on the potential side, and also the impact was not as interesting. And then you may, for example, go a next step as a clickable prototype and do LOIs, letters of intent. So that's something we have used a lot in our company. We didn't in this company we built. We didn't do landing page tests because the market would be too niche and narrow, like med tech quality managers. Didn't seem like a good experimentation method for that very niche B2B segment. Startup founders is a broader one to use. So wouldn't say that landing page can be used in B2B, but not for all cases. But we heavily used LOIs, letter of intents. We tested a prototype with about 20 customers. We asked 15 whether they want to sign an LOI, and about 9 or 10 signed the LOI at the end, the letter of intent. Really like we're soon going to have a podcast. So if you're interested, follow us on Flynn Comply LinkedIn to share that as well. Going to have a podcast where we have a 15-minute session where we explain like how to work with LOIs and so on. So feel free, if that's interesting, to follow us on that, because there's unfortunately not so much content out there how to actually do this. And then like a very interesting one after you've done an LOI could be, for example, concierge test, where you do you perform manually the product manually for your customers. And I personally, for me, that's one of the best and most exciting experimentation methods. It's like the learning curve is incredible when you do a concierge test. And I have been part of concierge tests multiple times in the past, and we're currently starting a concierge test for one of our clients. So while we build the product, we run our product's promise manually for one of our clients to really deeply learn all the details about this stuff. So concierge tests can be interesting to just learn more about the customer, learn more about the problem, learn more about the solution. It's very similar to a Wizard of Oz test. While in Wizard of Oz, customers don't know that you perform the whole process manually. It's behind the curtain. It's like secret. People think it's a machine. In concierge testing, it's basically you do it manually and people know that's done manually. And I can give you more examples if that's interested in the Q&A if you're interested in that. And then you can, of course, do some usability testing. And another exercise I love is buy a feature exercise. You can also find some readings on that online. I can also share a couple of interesting articles for you afterwards or in the description of the video. So usability testing is something some companies do too early. So in the first prototypes that you show to a customer, you want to learn, is that even a big problem for them? Is the overall solution even interesting? And then later on, like right now, after we have done, I think, about 50 user interviews in total, we are now starting to go into the usability testing with our product, where we want to know the fine challenges. Okay, does the customer actually understand how to build this search query in our product? Does the customer understand how to use our evaluation feature and so on? Like really deep dive, and buy a feature exercise or experiment to prioritize what will be part of the first version, MVP, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, your first version, you may call it MVP, is your ultimate test, but it's still a test, just a very high fidelity test. And you may have, after the first version, there's hopefully not so much uncertainty left. Maybe there's a lot of uncertainty and but hopefully not. So this is just an example of how you would pair different experiments along a journey of a new product. And you start usually with small numbers of customers and scale. Like this test is done maybe with 100 customers. In B2B, might still be only tens of customers, but in B2C can be hundreds of customers. So you become, in your testing, the larger you get, the more quantitative you will go. In the early stage, you're more qualitative usually. So that's why the big players that optimize products are very quant first. and qualitatively they use that for building a new product basically. And you go from understanding customer and problem to validating solution and business model. So that's a natural transition in the experiments that you oftentimes see when, again, building a new product. I recommend to use some test cards and learning cards to give your experimentation a bit of structure. So after you have done your prioritization of assumptions, you take the top 3 to 5, convert it into hypotheses, and these test cards, there are also different test cards. Like Strategizer is they are one of the most popular ones, but there are really cool test cards out there by other companies as well. It doesn't really matter. What I want to say is use some structure to structure your hypothesis, and you only do that for your top 3 to 5 assumptions, and you create kind of a test card and define okay, how will I do the test and blah blah blah, and how will do the learning. I think that for me was very helpful, because particularly in the early days when I was not so experienced yet with how to do experimentation. Here are a couple of examples you can look into that I found online and can be shared without any challenges on the privacy side. So feel free to look into that. So it's just a tip. I would really go structured here. And then once you've done your experiment, a big question is first, of course, the more simple one is okay, you have 3 possible outcomes of an assumption of an experiment. You validated your assumption or hypothesis in this case. So what's the next step? You test the next one. You go a level deeper in your funnel. You have, and that's unfortunately very often the case, you have an unclear result. So the test was not designed well. So what you do is you test more, you redesign a test, or you drop the assumption and say, okay, actually, we did a test, we didn't really learn what we wanted to learn, but we learned that actually I think this assumption is not as critical as we thought. We think a different assumption is actually a more critical one. Or you have an invalid assumption, in which case you stop working on this product, you pivot. This means you change the strategy without changing the vision. That's a pivot, the official definition of a pivot. Or you even change the complete vision. You say, we do something completely different. So that's the things you can do. And when you do all of this, it's important you document it. And I know that documentation is something in startups and in busy startup, but even corporate environment, is something most people don't have time for. So a very pragmatic approach in documenting is such a simple experimentation table, which can almost replace also the learning and testing card, because it somehow builds the learning and testing card into the table. Nonetheless, you might want to use something more visual, like the learning and testing card concept. For me, that worked also quite well when I was in phases of heavy experimentation, running a lot of experiments, and that's a very easy way to document it. You have a link to the template where you say, okay, you basically, one line is one experiment. And you just document and say, okay, what is the number of experiment? What's the hypothesis? So you don't list all your assumptions here. You just list stuff here that you actually transformed into a hypothesis. And then you can do your prioritization score here. You can define the test, the metrics. That's basically experimentation card, and that's the learning card. So you kind of pull that out in an Excel sheet. That's the simplest way to document and keep track of what's going on and who is doing what kind of experiment and so on. Very pragmatic one. Can make it more sophisticated, but always my recommendation: start simple and then make it more sophisticated as you go. That's the book I would recommend. If you have only time to read and buy one book, I would actually buy a physical copy, to be honest, because I think that's a book that describes 44 different experimentation methods, and it's out there in English and German and probably other languages. I think that's a really good starting point when you want to learn more about testing. I go back to it now and then when I want to say, what could be any good experimentation method? Kind of my handbook for my toolbox. So that's definitely a very good book on experimentation. Even though it says testing business ideas, that's what I said at the beginning. Experimentation is essential for product and business, and it's not only in the product world. I think that book is it's a must-have for every product person and business developer.